Are there any bill introductions? Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Senator and committee. The Clay Barker from the Kansas Secretary of State. We'd like to introduce Bill 25 RS 0365, which has to do with the 5-year review of regulations that I mentioned obliquely in testimony yesterday.
Committee, is there any objection? Seeing none, that bill will be introduced. Thank you. Committee, we are going to have today a presentation from Legislative Post Audit, and I think this will be very useful as we look at our work, as LPA can be a very good tool for identifying inefficiencies, and so I wanted them to share some of the things that they have done, some things that this committee might consider implementing or requesting for an audit, and then some of the ways that they can help us in our work. So we have Chris Clark with us, and welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. As Chairman Erickson said, I am Chris Clark. I'm the Director of Legislative Post Audit. I have worked closely with a few of you, and I see some new faces for me, but please know, Post Audit is one of the staff resources. We're a legislative agency. We provide non-biased, nonpartisan evaluations of operations. We are governed by the 10-member Legislative Post Audit Committee, but I work for all of you. So today I'm going to give you a brief history of efficiency auditing that has been conducted by my office. I have a memo, hopefully, in your packets. Again, just going to briefly outline the history of efficiency auditing by Division of Post Audit. And by history, I mean we're going to roll back to the 70s. Back in 1978, the Kansas Sunset Law was established. And during that time, from 78 to 1992, this law was set out to abolish selected state agencies, boards, or commissions, unless the legislature acted to retain them. During that time period, 5 agencies or boards were abolished, 2 agencies were combined, and 1 agency was separated out into its own agency. Several years passed. In 1992, the legislature replaced that sunset law with the Kansas Governmental Accountability Law. It's commonly referred to as KGOL. And from 1992 to 2008, the purpose of this law was to provide accountability by having legislative committees periodically review the operations of selected state agencies. There was an 8-year schedule of agencies that would be reviewed and evaluated by Legislative Post Audit. The legislature amended that over the years, that list, to add or remove certain agencies from the schedule. In 2008, the legislature severely changed KGOL, this comprehensive revision. Instead of assigning specific agencies on that multi-year schedule, the new law expanded KGOL to provide accountability for any state agency or state program. Under the amended law, the Legislative Post Audit Committee directs our staff to conduct at least 4 audits each year that meet the provisions of KGOL. And these are things like evaluating selected agencies or programs to make sure they serve the public need, are economically beneficial, are operationally efficient, and cost-effective. The scope of these audits, and this is still current law, the scope of these audits can be very broad or very narrow, as defined by the Legislative Post Audit Committee. And the types of things under KGOL, again, there's 4 main areas: whether the agency is still needed, but that really encompasses whether the purpose or problem or need that the agency or program was established to still exists, whether the agency or program provides a significant public benefit, whether abolishing the agency would significantly harm the public's health or welfare, and whether there would be possible savings from abolishing the agency. The next aspect of KGOL is whether another federal, state, local, or private entity exists that could effectively perform that function. Again, looking at, is there a federal inspection function that we also have state inspectors doing the same thing? The third main provision of KGOL is whether the agency or program could be operated more efficiently. And this can include assessing whether the agency or program is doing more than is necessary or authorized, whether the agency or program's statutory authority or how they were set up reflect the current environment, whether the agency or program is responsive to the public's needs, whether the agency's programs or functions could be less burdensome or restrictive, those sorts of things. And then finally, the last category is kind of other things. So again, this is current law. So just for your example, some recent audits that the Legislative Post-Audit Committee that we have done that meet KGOL include evaluating whether services to collect child support payments in Kansas are effective and timely, evaluating the STAR bond financing program, evaluating monitoring requirements and processes for the federal low-income housing tax credit program, those sorts of audits. Other efficiency directives from the past. There was something called the 2010 Commission, for those that have been here a while. This was a steering committee created by the legislature in 2005 to monitor and evaluate the school finance formula. This committee was statutorily charged with selecting audit topics for the LPA school team. We had a dedicated school team of auditors that did nothing but school audits. And then finally, in 2015, the legislature hired a private consulting firm called Alvarez and Marsal to conduct an efficiency study of state government. A&M released their study in 2016 that had 105 efficiency recommendations. We tracked that for a number of years. That was not my office, but we were in charge of tracking it. Our last tracking report was 2021. Of those 105 recommendations, 42 had been implemented, 43 had been rejected, and the remaining were either in progress or NA. So here we are today, Legislative Post-Audit Committee. We're perking along just fine. There was kind of a big push back in the 2008-2010 timeframe for efficiency audits. At one point, there was a directive that half of our audits be dedicated to efficiencies. In 2008, the Post-Audit Committee amended its rules to establish that rule. Today, current committee rules require that we prepare a few proposals, we staff, prepare a few proposals each year for the committee to consider. And we get these topics looking for efficiencies by reviewing audits conducted in other states by our counterparts, things we observe while we are conducting current audit work, suggestions from various sources. And then the Legislative Post-Audit Committee considers these staff-suggested efficiency topics when it selects topics from individual legislators. So we have the 4 KGOL per year, and then efficiency topics suggested by staff. So how we can help. Audits can identify inefficiencies, but I want to make it clear, becoming more efficient isn't the same as necessarily cutting costs. Ways to improve efficiency in operations could include becoming more economical, which means using fewer resources or paying less for those resources, or becoming more productive, such as removing bottlenecks in processes. Finally, something else for your consideration, audits can also determine effectiveness. So as you do your work going forward, as you know, there's a big difference between efficiency and effectiveness. A real simple example that always brought this home to me back in the day is if you have 50 first graders, if you give them one teacher to teach them reading, that is very efficient in terms of costs, but it's probably not very effective. So if you put 10 teachers in that room and they each have 5 students, that's probably way more effective, but it's not as efficient in terms of costs. So the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. So effectiveness is the agency accomplishing its goals. So in that example, teaching students how to read is a goal. How you would measure that is the % of students who achieve proficiency in reading on state assessments. If you're looking just at efficiency, you would focus on the resources. How productive are those resources? Measures would be the cost per student or the number of students per teacher. So I have attached a list at the end of many, many examples of old efficiency and effective audits Post-audit has done. Again, this was a big push in the 2010s or so. But we looked at Department of Health and Environment, savings and freeing up staff time by automating inspection reports. Back in the day, they were paper. Savings from restructuring staff positions, Department of Ag, involving the Animal Health Department and the Conservation Commission. Generating cash back rebates by using cash back purchase cards for state agencies. Again, these are pretty old, but other ideas were combining state agencies, reorganizing districts such as school districts or judicial districts even, looking at savings on benefits programs or efficiencies, and that sort of thing. So we're here to help. We are a staff of analysts and auditors. We can look at efficiencies, we can look at effectiveness. We take legislative requests, we take committee requests. So we are here to help in any way we can. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that very informative background and as we go forward from this committee, potential opportunities. So committee, what questions do you have? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chris. And I just want to say, first of all, Post-Audit does great work. They really do. With the limited size staff that they have, too. With regard to these recommendations for savings on agencies, I know with each audit you give recommendations, like some of the audits we've heard recently, but I don't remember seeing these specific type recommendations on agencies or programs. Are there any in progress right now, or do we have to request that if we were to do so from this committee?
I don't have very many recent examples where you all have directed us to do efficiency type work. I listed a few under the K goal, but identifying savings or identifying ways to save money, that was a big push back in 2010, and there really hasn't been so much of that recently.
And so if we were to request those type of efficiency audits, would that limit then what we're doing in the Legislative Post-Audit Committee with regard to the number of audits that we're performing? We would have to reevaluate what we're doing in that committee, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, yeah, great work. I was just sort of curious. You mentioned on that A&M study, said 42 had been implemented and 43 rejected. What does it mean that they were rejected?
Same with our audits. When we make recommendations, it's up to the agency to respond. And sometimes they implement them, sometimes they say it's in process, but sometimes they do reject because things have changed or they've decided to go about it in a very different way, so it kind of makes the point moot. It can be forever, or it could be, no, we're not going to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And along the same lines on the A&M study, you mentioned 42 or so have been implemented. Are they still implemented? Are you still?
I'm sorry, we haven't looked at it since 2021. So it would take a lot of work, but I could look into that for you. But we stopped tracking back in 2021.
Would that be somewhere if this committee wanted to look for efficiencies to start? I mean,
to see if they really.
Number one, the ones that were implemented, did they really save money or become more efficient? And then those that weren't implemented, rejected, I'm not sure reason why but we had a bunch more that were never acted on. So would that be a place to start for this committee?
I could certainly look through the records and find somewhere there's a tally to come up with those numbers. I could certainly provide that to the committee, and it might be good to reach out to those entities, agencies, programs, whatever they are, and say, what's been done? Have the savings materialized? I can certainly try and dig up a list.
We put an estimate on those that when you do implement, okay, you should save X dollars. And then, did we actually save that money is a question, or was it as efficient as what we anticipated?
Yeah, and that was that consulting group put together the estimated savings.
Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation, the information. My question goes along the same lines in terms of that 2016 study. And my question is this, maybe we should spend some time and energy evaluating, if those efficiency recommendations went into effect and if indeed they did help. But then I also wonder, is there something to be said about the fact that 9 years have gone by? And I mean, obviously there's been a lot of changes in technology. Would some of this be dated, I guess, is my question in terms of the recommendations that were made at that point?
My guess would be yes.
And maybe too, I don't know, sorry if I can ask a follow-up. In terms of those actual recommendations made, I do kind of wonder, like I said, if we know if a certain number were technology-based or, kind of what the theme was, I guess.
I'd have to go dig. I don't.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of to add on to this whole discussion, I think that I've been on there, I think, 5 years. And sometimes the frustration I feel is that we've got these great audits out there, and then we've got this data, and the legislature either doesn't address it or maybe doesn't know what to do with it. And so, I mean, we've got all these reports on star bonds, these big projects like, we just had one yesterday from the Department of Commerce, and HPIP and PEAK and all these different programs. There was an audit here recently, I think within the last year, that showed these programs don't actually pay for themselves. I think that was a determination from the post-audit committee. So what do we do with that? Or do we need to evaluate these programs? And I guess I'll get to the question for Chris is, we have these audits now that are lined up for you guys to perform, and we pretty much fill your time. Is there statute where we have to repeal the request for those audits to change things if we in this committee requested specific efficiency audits on something?
How it's currently set up by committee rule is any requests that come in from the start of session to April-ish are considered by the committee and picked at the April meeting. But that's committee rule. The committee can do whatever it would like. There's another rule that any audits that they approved, that you all approved last April, that we have not started by this coming April, are rescinded and then go on the list for possible selection again.
That gives us some potential vacancies over the next couple of months if something hasn't started or we see some potential efficiency audits we'd like. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you were to audit the legislator on our ability to respond and take action based off of audit findings, how would we grade?
Okay, so I have an out for that. Thankfully, I follow government auditing standards, and as a legislative staff agency, I cannot audit the legislature because that is a conflict of interest. So no comment.
Good answer. I will say that.
But I will say that is sort of our role, is to go out and suss out the information, vet it, get you as best to truth as possible. But then it's up to you all to make the policy choices.
Committee, other questions? So just a couple of things. I don't know if this is a question, but would value your input, because I'm hearing kind of the same thing. And I always went kind of by these 3 rules in my former life as a school administrator. Here's what. So we've got these audits. Here's what. So what? So what? What does it say? What does it mean? Now what? And I think to Senator Shane and Senator Thompson's point, I think the legislature has probably dropped the ball on now what? What do we do with this information? And it's a great segue into what I think this committee, it's a great opportunity because we've not had a dedicated committee to say, we know. Post Audit has done a great job of giving us the information, but there's not the follow through. Welcome to Government Efficiency Committee. I think it's incumbent upon us for that follow through. And so what I would like to do, first a quick question, follow through. This list of significant savings from fiscal year 09 through 11, how many of, do you know how many of these were actually implemented or any legislative action was taken to address them? I mean, I'm seeing just ripe for the harvest opportunity here. Was there ever any follow-up on these?
We do have a follow-up process. I'd have to go refresh as to where these landed. But when we do release an audit, and make recommendations, we follow up every 6 months for 2 years. Have you implemented it? What have you done? Is it in process? Are you going to reject it? And then after 2 years, if it hasn't been implemented, our stance is it's probably not going to be, so we're going to stop tracking it. So, but those are on our website as well. We do follow up for 2 years. But I will have to go, it's been a long time. I'd have to go look for.
It's okay. How many staff members do you have, and how many audits do you and your staff have the capacity to do each year?
We are an agency of 26. Actual boots on the ground doing audit work is about 19 or 20 of those staff. And it's hard to give an actual number because an audit is not an audit is not an audit. Some are very tiny, some are very extensive. But I think in my performance measures that I recently put together, I think the last couple of years, it's been low teens as the number of audits that we've produced a year. Between 10 and 15.
My understanding, Ms. Clark, is that the committee always receives way more audit requests than you possibly can do. And so I guess my charge to this committee is I think we need to look, and I expect you all to say, we want to jump into the audits. We need to see what we think are the most productive audits that we can request for this committee and get those in the works and hopefully get some of that generated so we can go forward and know the information, because as has been mentioned, they do great work, and it's a shame if we don't act on that work. So I want to charge this committee, what audit ideas do you have? And then let's bring them back and prioritize them and make that request to the LPA committee. So Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the question is, do you have a list of the audits that have been performed and not been acted on?
That we haven't completed yet?
Yes. Well,
Or, no.
that the legislature
I'm sorry.
hasn't taken up, and you did the audit, you completed it, and it's just sitting there. I know you've done several for me.
That's a tough question because sometimes it takes a year or 2 or 3 for things to percolate, for action to actually happen. And all of our audits don't necessarily result in a recommendation for the legislature to act. Oftentimes it's for the agency to clean up something or change something. Yeah, that would be a tough one to come up with.
You have this list in here.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any others which we need to consider that you would recommend us consider?
With efficiency mindset, let me put together a list and I will share that with you. Madam Chair, if I may, if you're in doing your work, if you have an idea for an audit or you hear a concern or you think, please reach out either directly or check our website because we've done a ton of audits. We've been around since the 70s. We may have done something on that topic, which we could do a follow-up on or we could, that sort of thing.
That would be very helpful, that list, so thank you. Senator Thompson?
Yeah, in fact, I was going to kind of suggest that. You can go to you can find their website and Division of Post Audit on the main legislative website on the left-hand side under Legislative Resources. And, you can go down the list of those audits. There are a number of things sitting at committee. Yeah, we make they make recommendations to agencies, but things like evaluating the angel tax credit or some of these other evaluating star bond financing programs, some of those things, we might be able to start by looking at that list off of their website. And maybe if Chris could take a few of those or provide us a list of what things she thinks we could look at more closely, that would give us a starting point for that list.
And one more point, Madam Chair. Our audits go to Legislative Post-Audit Committee first. They're sort of a clearinghouse, but then we do send the audits and make many presentations to a substantive committee. So the star bonds or the angel tax, it goes to post-audit first, but then we do present the audit to the tax committee and to the commerce committee and that sort of thing.
So the recommendations that you make to the agency, those are very helpful. I always go to those pretty quick after I see what the purpose of the audit is and then skim and then go the summary and then the recommendations. What accountability is there? I mean, just in my experience, it's just kind of like we recommend this and the agencies go, oh, that's nice. Sometimes they respond and say, well, this is why, but is there really any true accountability or follow through on LPA recommendations?
Well, like I said, from our perspective, we follow up every 6 months and we report to the committee, I think it's once a year, the status of all the recommendations. We also have a running list on our website for all the world to see is the status of all the recommendations and what's been done.
Okay, committee, any other questions? When I got the presentation from Chris and looked over it, I thought this is extremely helpful. I hope you have found it helpful. I hope it gets some ideas flowing. I like the idea of the list to give us a starting point of past efficiency audits that you guys have done. Yes. Appreciate you coming and presenting. Committee, is there?
So I will give you a list of the audits that you should follow up on and then more detail about those recommendations from that private study.
Great. Any other requests information that we would like from Ms. Clark? Great. Thank you so much for your time and for being here.
The last page of my presentation has my contact information, so please reach out.
Thank you so much. Okay, committee, any other business before us today? Seeing none, we are adjourned.